Hello, I'm Jimmy Bach, and this is History with Jimmy. This is episode 24, and I think you're going to find this one very interesting, as I did. And at the very end, we're going to have some items to show you that you're going to be able to purchase with this particular episode. I said this is episode 24. I'm here with my producer and associate, Chandler Holmes, and today we are talking about Paterson Grove. Many of you have heard about Paterson Grove. Maybe you've never been there. It's been there since, 1830. But believe it or not, it was always not named Paterson Grove. And we're going to tell you how it got changed from the name that it was to what it is today. How about that? Okay. So, more than a century of existence, Paterson Grove Campground traces its original back to more than a distant past. In 1784, the Methodist Episcopal Church in the United States became a dynamic spiritual force. And that's what this was originally, a Methodist Protestant church. It's actually a Methodist, you could say, a retreat. There's people there that go there probably that aren't Methodist, but most of them there, and it was started as that stuff. So, Huntington Valley, everybody knows Huntington Mills, Huntington Valley, out that way. The camp meeting in Huntington Valley dates back to around the 1830s. And the earliest meeting place, it was called Wadsworth Grove, a short distance from southwest of the Town Hill School on land owned by Reverend Wadsworth, who was perhaps the son of the senior Wadsworth. And in 1847, the gathering became too large to move to Harveys Woods, where it remained for 20 years. So originally it started out as Wadsworth Grove, then it became Harveys Woods. And Harveys Woods was a strip of land that was owned at that time by Benjamin Harvey of Harveyville. Extended from Shickshinny Benton Highway, now Route 239, north to the road branching from the highway to Town Hill on the south. It lay just west of what was then Larnard's Farm. The campground can be seen today on the left side of the Route 239, just after one passes the top of the hill where Huntington Mills on its way to Benton. Now, I don't know if that's true today with all the trees and everything, but back when this article was written, that was obviously true. A house now stands at what was the corner of the encampment. The two entrances to the grounds was one on the highway to Benton, and the other one was on the road to Town Hill. And a large spring located a short distance south of the highway supplied water. And the location by 1867 was proving too small for the growing crowds. So, in 1867, the name changed again. Harveyville and Town Hill were both with the Bloomingdale Circuit of the Methodist Protestant and what was known as the North Cumberland District of East Baltimore Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church. And in August 1867, a meeting was held near Town Hill. That is Harveys Woods, was the previous name, obviously. And the Bloomingdale Circuit appointed Nathan Dodson, John Minor Goss, and John Holmes a committee to procure, if practicable, a suitable grove for permanent camp meetings. Because as he said, they were in different places and stuff. And the word permanent set a new policy. The earlier camp meeting had been held on borrowed ground. So they went on there, and the committee applied to Samuel Headley for what was known as Headley's Sugar Maple Camp near the mouth of Kitchens Creek. Headley was a well-known lawyer, landowner, and businessman having substantial interest in landowner in many different businesses and stuff, including farms, mortgages, mills, a store. He was an active member of the Methodist Episcopal Church, and he had purchased the Sugar Maple Camp together with another property at Harveyville at a sheriff's sale in 1850. Headley responded favorably and the committee so reported to the quarterly conference, adding that the ground was most desirable. Headley therefore prepared a deed of trust, which after some alterations was accepted by the conference. So the deed was provided for use of the Sugar Maple Grove for camp meetings, but included complicated provisions including water and sugar rights and other use of the land. So it was sort of a complicated deed, you could say. So in 1868, a number of members of the churches of Bloomingdale Circuit met on the proposed new grounds. The decision to move was not unanimous. One person voted against it. But Harveys Woods was no longer suitable for large camp meetings. So they proceeded to organize, declaring the preacher in charge and permanent chairman of the board, Samus F. Headley, and he was elected permanent secretary. George Larnard, treasurer, and Headley was appointed to lay out the grounds for an audience area, streets, lots, tents, and other buildings there. And as you can see, we have a picture going back to this, and you can see it today. That's right here on this board. If you want to see it in more detail, you can come to the museum, set up a tour, and you'll be able to see that. So a meeting on the Grove of 28th, 1868, the trustees approved the plans and authorized Headley and John M. Goss to carry them into effect, dig wells, procure pumps and lumber, and do what necessary to prepare for camp meetings. Then, on August 28, 1868, they appointed Nathan Dodson, chief manager of the police and fire department, with the power to appoint help as necessary, and there was a special committee to attend the charge for collections, and generally to do all things necessary, what's proper known as the financial affairs of the meeting. Notices were sent to various newspapers, preachers were invited. The first camp meeting to open at Headley's Grove was open. So between the 25th of August and the September 1868, 25 ministers signed in there and stuff. And there's a bunch of them here, and I'm not going to go into all of them because this is actually 46 pages long, and I've cut it down considerably to do this episode. So the first camp meeting opened up on August 26, 1868, and continued through Thursday, September the 3rd. 127 tents had been erected, most of them built with shingled roofs. Because the stand was unfinished, the first preaching service was delayed until the evening. Reverend Croswell, who was noted for his fine voice and who later years called the father of the campground, opened the service by singing. The next evening, the service by Mr. Crowther announced to the congregation that the campground had been generously donated by Colonel Headley to the Perpetual Service of God as a place for holding camp meetings, and it was proper in accordance with the urgings of the churches to dedicate solely to the service. Headley that came forward with the deed of trust in his hand and delivered the dedicated address, including these words. I'm not going to read them, but you can come here and read them in this episode that we have. Believe it or not, August 29, 1968, how many people you think were present at that time for this camp meeting? Well, 4,000 persons were present during the day, and also at the close of the camp. That was recorded that was one of the largest group of people that they had ever had. Of course, they were in a much bigger camp and stuff. So, but in the financial figures at the book, receipts exceeded more than $200.18, which would have been a lot of money back then. So then the trustees decided it was to build for rent board tents. Now the board tents were measured 16 feet by 14 feet deep, 1 story high with a load roof, and with the board floor under the bunk. They could be constructed so they could be rented as a whole tent for $10, half a tent for $5, and a half tent would measure 8 feet wide by 14 deep These tents, actually small frame cottages, had no doors, and the occupants covered the sheets over the doorways. So then they went on and they had other services there. The second camp meeting was held in 1869 and closed the evening. Let's see here. With awnings, they were going to build awnings onto these, but then they decided not to, apparently, at this particular time. So here's a little history. The first death on the campground occurred this year, and an unusual account of it is, and that's the reason that I'm telling it. On Monday, September 2nd, 1872, it's recorded. How true is it that in the midst of life, we are in death? And this, we are deeply impressed by the providence of God today. Brother Jesse Yoakum of Northumberland, the father of Ezra H. Yoakum, pastor of the M.E. Church at Hazleton, was in prayer meeting this morning in the altar. He prayed most fervently and impressively. A few minutes afterwards, he was smitten down by a stroke of apoplexy. He was immediately carried to the presiding elder's room, medical assistance summoned. All remedies, however, proved unfailing. He sank into a state of unconsciousness from which he never recovered. He sank gradually, and at 8:30, he peacefully and sweetly fell asleep in Jesus. The scene was a most impressive one, surrounded by friends, whose silent and fervent prayers were ascending for the expiating veteran of the cross. He sank gradually into the unbroken slumber. His breath grew fainter and fainter until all was over. His son Ezra and wife were watching by the bedside while the presiding elder bent over, now the silent slumber impressively, and said, "Forever with the Lord." It was a glorious way to die, and his years he had been dedicated to the service of Christ and was one of the prominent members of the church. So that was the first death at the camp. At 5 o'clock in the next morning, funeral services were held in his room by the presiding elder, Samuel Barnes. The body was taken horse-drawn hearse to Shickshinny and on to Northumberland by train. So now we come into some legal complications, as usually what happens if somebody gives something to somebody, or like wills today or different things, somebody's always going to say, this was mine or whatever. And that's what happened a couple times here. But I'm not going to go into big details about them. I'll let you come and read it for yourself. But Headley had left a willing ground to subject rules and camp meeting, but soon after a dispute arose about the title. Joseph Long of Roseburg, Columbia County, brought action against the campground trustees who I had named previously. And one of them was Benjamin Franklin Headley, son of Samuel. So they came out in court in 1875, 40 years after the original suit. I guess they had extensions in court back then as well. So I'm not going to get into that, but it went into rather lengthy times and it wasn't fully settled till a couple years later. But they finally did, after 17 months again, followed. They divided the land. They gave 2/6 to Long, who was to pay the others for cash, as it was impractical to divide the land in proper proportions, as Mr. Paterson noted. And it appeared both parties dispute were losers. Ultimately, the campground fared better than Joseph Long. Long gained 12 acres of land, but at the cost of prosecuting one lawsuit, defending another, and mentioning some. So that's usually what happens when you get into these things. So, owing to the temporary injections of the trustees from the land, there was no camp meeting at Headley's Grove in 1875 or 1876. But in 1876, a bush meeting was held at Paterson's Amphitheater on Marshall's Hollow Road past the Paterson home. A bush meeting was held outdoors, but the people didn't stay overnight in the grounds. They came in distance. They stayed in the homes of people nearby. In 1887, August 20th, Closing was held at Headley's Grove. This was done because the stipulation of the original agreement with Headley that if no meeting was held for 3 years, the land would revert to original owners. So they had to have some type of meeting there, even though it wasn't completely settled. So there. So now we get into how did it become the name Paterson Grove? Well, I'm going to tell you. Change of the name. The last camp meeting under Headley Grove began on Tuesday, August 20th, 1878, and closed on August 30th. When camp meeting opened, the camp meeting was finally free from legal uncertainties that had been practically no income for 3 years because they had to pay for bills and stuff. So there was a heavy debt to pay. And part of the expenses had been met with borrowed money, and during 1878, the preachers and trustees campaigned for funds to pay the debt. When all about $100 had been raised, someone approached Ezekiel Montgomery Paterson, a prominent and wealthy businessman of New Brunswick, New Jersey, visiting his birthplace, the Paterson farm at Harveyville. He considered the matter. He discussed it with his friend Abraham Nesbitt Harvey and offered to pay half the debt if Harvey would pay the other half. When Harvey declined, Paterson offered to give the whole amount, provided the campground no longer be known as Headley's Grove. Asked what he wanted it named, he replied that any name would be acceptable, but he would be especially pleased if the grove was named in the honor of his mother, Mrs. Mary Dennison Paterson. Mrs. Paterson had been reared a Methodist and been one of the first of that denomination in the vicinity of the campground, and had been a faithful supporter of the church for 50 years. Patterson's proposal was accepted immediately, and someone started ringing the bell, and people, fearing a fire, rushed to the tabernacle. Amid much excitement, the news was announced. So on the following Monday, August 26, 1878, the 10th anniversary, the commencement of camp meetings at Headley Grove, by resolution, the Board of Trustees was named Paterson Grove Campground in honor and memory of Mrs. Mary Dennison. So there you have it. So in 1879, A.N. Harvey was authorized to ask the court to afford 6 men as police. They had to borrow police badges from the police force in Wilkes-Barre, and that was in accordance with the state law, which required campgrounds to be policed because of the shooting and scrapes and drunken brawls that sometimes occur. Most of the troublemakers were outsiders, not campground folk. Paterson Grove never had this trouble. As a matter of fact, in 1879, the police force at Paterson Grove appeared before the Board of Trustees and made the complaint they had nothing to do, and they were afraid the Board of Trustees would not sustain them. Their fears were removed when they went to the places growling, and by 1922, police were employed on Sundays only when the crowds were really large. The first musical instrument they had was an organ. It broke on the way to the campground and got fixed. Then they appointed a committee to build a boarding tent where people could stay, like the boarding house that's there today. And you can see in the picture there's a lot of different buildings there. Houses were built close together and stuff. And so the first chief barber was 1880, was William Bogart. His shop was a favorite resort for adult male population of the Grove, and according a spot particularly attracted to visiting politicians. Bogart made a point of warning office seekers who came around that they should not talk my boys away without getting a shave. So the politicians had to get a shave in order to campaign at the campground. How about that? So visiting politicians were found all over the campground. They were especially there at camp meeting Sundays, which brought them much disfavor, however, and at least once they were attacked from the pulpit. One preacher stated, "They don't care for your soul nor their own. They intend first to get in office and then a good character. They then go on from there to saloons, and then, of course, camp meeting is all forgotten until the returns come in." How about that one? On Sunday night, an outburst of shouts and arrays, Republican candidates disturbed the camp meeting. Investigations showed that a local merchant, C.M. Swayze, a Garfield man, was selling cider on the grounds and infusing the boys with contents of the barrel. He was promptly arrested. Well, they got him. So, for many years, the camp was held on, a silver offering plate was taken to the gate, and the amount to enter was 10 cents. The number of autos and vehicles parked in the grounds, listen to this one, 1,700, and allowed three more hundred for outside. There was 200 vehicles at the camp at that time. So they totaled $586.15. Women and children were not charged, and many people entered the ground at other places to avoid paying. Well, we've heard about that before. So here's the first baby was born at Paterson Grove. Tuesday, August the 8th, a daughter was born to Mrs. Frances Reed of Fairmont Springs. Mother and daughter doing nicely. This is the first time in the history of Paterson Grove of the stork visiting the grove, but the angel of death had appeared 4 times to our knowledge and carried away Jesse Yoakum, Dr. Peter Boston's father, Mrs. George Case, and a small boy of Mr. and Mrs. Ben Root. We hope this little girl will be proud of her distinction of her birthplace. The baby's name was Beatrice. So one of the last things that we get into here, there was many people that visited the campground, but there was a famous person who actually visited the campground and participated. Now, probably a lot of people today won't remember him, but there's probably some older people that will, and it was Will Rogers, and he addressed the auditorium during the Tri-County picnic in 1926. How about that? So they had somebody famous there. Paterson Grove, the camp meeting is far the most important. As they did pray, this place was ever meant to be watered with the dew of heaven, that its beauty may remain, and that our children and our children's children, to the latest period of time, may meet upon this consecrated spot and bow with humility and in prayer, praise, truly worship our Father and our God, and receive him from the full blessings of the gospel of Christ. So this ends the story, but there's a lot more to it, but I wanted to try to make this as short as I could. So speaking of those items, we have some items that we sell here at the museum, and I'm going to show them to you. And these are called brandy wines, and this is one of Paterson Grove. And this tells Holler Grove, who it was named for, the little bit of history is on there and stuff. And so we have these for sale, but these are going like hotcakes. These ones here are meant to be hung on a Christmas tree. There's not a lot of them left. They've really sold out. And Cheryl has a website set up where you can go to ShickshinnyHistoricalSociety.org, and it says chat with her, and if you'd like to purchase any of these items, you can contact her through that way and make arrangements to get one, or come to the museum, see for yourself everything that we have, and we have others of these that we will be speaking about in episode 25. So I thank you again for watching. Please click on the like and the subscribe button and stuff, so that you get more people to come. We have a lot of people liking these episodes that we're doing, so please do this. So this is Chandler Holmes and Jim Bach signing off on episode 24. Thank you.